Hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Mr. Ian Teaches English. Today is another specific modal video lesson. We're talking about should and ought to. Now, don't forget, I made an introduction video about modals that you need to watch first. So go back and watch that video before you continue with this one. As always, if you like the content, please consider subscribing because it does help me out. Also, if you like the video, let me know. And in the comments, let me know what types of videos you want me to make. If you find modals interesting, let me know. If you have other questions about English, let me know, because I'm a teacher and my job is to teach English, like the name says. So I'll stop talking and let's jump into the lesson. All right, let's talk about the specific modals should and ought to. Remember, we are talking about individual modals in these lessons. So if you want the introduction on what modals are, the basics of them, go check out the introduction video. Now, modals, what are they? I will put this slide in front of all of the lessons that we do. This is just a reminder of what these modals are. So read those very quickly. But again, go back and look at the original video, the introduction video, to have a complete idea of what it is. Should and ought to are our modals for today. Now, they are exactly the same. If you use should, you can also use ought to. It doesn't matter. Should is more common, but ought to is also used. Now, two reasons we use these modals. The first one is advice, and you probably already use this for advice, and you probably understand what advice is. It's simply giving a good idea, what you think is a good idea to someone else. For example, you should go to bed earlier, or you ought to go to bed earlier. They should stop talking. They ought to stop talking. All right, you know this. Number two is one that students usually don't know. This is expectations. When you are talking about a prediction about how something works or what happens next, we use should or ought to. So, for example, if you push this button, it should start working or ought to start working. This is an expectation, something that you think will happen in the future. The weather should be nice this weekend. The weather ought to be nice this weekend. Again, we're looking at an expectation. What do you think is going to happen? No guarantee. What do you think is going to happen? And the last one, the negative form, the car shouldn't or ought not to make that noise. All right, so having a look at that, using it in the negative, something that you don't expect. Be careful. We use the contraction for shouldn't. We don't contract oughtn't. All right, so don't say oughtn't. It's not a word. Just separate those. Now let's talk a little bit about the pronunciation of ought to before we continue. Ought to is sometimes spelled oughta. Now notice I'm an American, so my T's are soft. So it sounds like oughta, but it's never spelled like that. In very informal situations, you'll hear people spelling it like this, or you'll see people spelling it like this, oughta. All right. You can pronounce it like that. I prefer you write it completely, especially as learners. It shows that you know the language on a good level. So I recommend writing ought to, but pronouncing oughta. So as we go through from here on, as we continue, I will pronounce it oughta instead of ought to. All right, now the practice. So take a moment. There are only two definitions here, so a little bit easier than the last video, which had way more definitions. But go through these 10 sentences, pause the video, tell me if it's definition 1, advice, or definition 2, expectation, because telling the difference in the context is a really important skill. All right, let's talk about these examples. Number 1, you should take some medicine. This is advice, definition number 1. Number 2, you ought to go home now is also advice. And remember, you can replace these. You can say you ought to take some medicine or you should go home. It's exactly the same. Be careful you don't say should to, though. Don't say should to. should and base form, or oughta and base form. Number 3, Tom should arrive at noon. This is an expectation. This is something you predict will happen in the future. Number 4, the students ought to be working. This again is an expectation. Number 5, you should drive my car. Advice. Number 6, if you're tired, you ought to go to bed. Advice. Number 7, if it's plugged in, it should turn on. Expectation. Number 8, holidays should be celebrated with family. This is an expectation. Number 9, you ought to subscribe to Mr. Ian Teaches English. That's advice. It's good advice too. And the last one here, the rain should stop in about an hour. It's an expectation. If you have any questions about these, go ahead and put it in the comments. Again, this is a short video, doesn't give you a lot of explanation, but do some sentences in the comments. I'll let you know if they're any good, or if you have a specific question that I didn't talk about here, please let me know. Now, why is this important? And this is the same slide at the end of all of these modal presentations, these modal lessons. This is extremely important. Knowing these modal definitions help you understand people well. If you don't understand that should and ought to is also for expectations, and you think it's only for advice, then you're going to have some weird situations where an English speaker is talking about expectations and you think they're giving you advice. If you get these wrong, it does cause confusion. So just pay attention to them. Look for them in books, look for them in movies. You cannot learn English well from these little videos online. The videos are great, please watch the videos, but you need the exposure to English writing, English speaking, listening to things. And after you learn these lessons with the modals, look for them. You'll find them if you're looking. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching this video about should and oughta. Now, use that pronunciation well and you're gonna sound like a master of English. As always, if you liked the video, let me know. There are many other videos about modals that are on my channel, so go ahead and check out the modals playlist to learn all of these extremely important ideas. So make sure that you take time to learn them and to look for them in everyday life, in books, in movies, and things like that. So, as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.